and there is common ground. I'd like to finish with an appeal. We know that you have a good relationship with the President of France, Mr. Macron, but you don't share the same story. Your story is a lot closer to what the European citizens want today and are looking for. And I would call on you, Mr. Michel, stand fast, stick to that story, and you can be assured that you will find strong partners in this European Union. You'll also garner support from our group, the European Conservatives and Reformers, when you choose for unity in diversity. Thank you.
Mr. Luns, it's possible to be against 2 seats of the European Parliament, to be in favor of only 1 seat, but Strasbourg is not a circus, it's the seat, one of the seats of the European Parliament. A nome del gruppo
for the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats in Europe, Mr. Verhofstadt. President, I'll start by speaking the mother tongue of our Prime Minister, Charles Michel, to thank him for his vision, his pro-European vision. I prefer your speech than Mr. Lunes's interpretation thereof. Mr. Lunes has apparently heard a different speech. I don't know which speech, but apparently it was made before the Flemish Parliament or the Federal Parliament of Belgium. So I'd like to thank you for your pro-European vision as you set it out. And this builds on the great pro-European tradition that exists in Belgium. One of our predecessors, Paul-Henri Spaak, said that all European countries fall into 2 countries, those that know that there are small countries and those that do not yet know that they are small countries. And that's our approach as Belgians to European politics. In fact, colleagues, bear in mind, and I'll explain this because Mr. Lunes didn't, that for the Belgians, they are Flemish, they are Walloon, they are Bruxellois, but all of them are pro-European. And this is not a matter of choice. In Belgium, this is an existential matter. Our country, our land, for too long has been the battlefield of all of Europe, wedged as it is between Germany on the one side and France on the other. They've all come through Belgium. The French, the Germans twice, I have to say, the Spanish, the Dutch, the Austrians, even the Italians, if I go back to Roman times, but perhaps that's too lost in the mists of time. All major conflicts, and I'm not kidding, all major conflicts in European history have been fought here, on this land. Wars of religion, wars of succession, trench warfare with millions and millions of dead, and the first use of gas, a chemical weapon, in the world. Here, 100 and something kilometers from here. And then, of course, the war against Nazism, the worst of all nationalisms, I would say. And I would address myself, therefore, directly to Mr. Lunes, who perhaps hasn't grasped this. It is clear that there is a possible future for our land and for our people. It's a shared future and a European destiny. And everything else, Prime Minister, and I do not need to tell you this, are lies, are cons, and dreams that will swiftly become nightmares. And we saw that in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Only Europe can save us from the grinding misery of the past and those atrocities of the past. And I tell you all this, colleagues, to say that it's not chocolate, and it's not beer, and it's not Tintin, and not the accursed D'Hondt voting system that is typically Belgium. No, what is typically Belgium is our love for Europe, our passion for the European project. That is typical of us. A project, President, one has to say, that is under threat today, not because of nationalists and populists. We know about them. We see them. They're our colleagues. We see them almost every day. But it's under threat because of what's going on in terms of the national political leaders, people you'll find in every political family in this chamber. Political leaders, and I'm not talking about you, you are one of the rare exceptions, who display themselves as pro-Europeans to the outside world, but in fact do nothing to move the project forward. In fact, I would say they're doing the opposite today, and that dishonours the founding fathers of the European Union, because those founding fathers had another vision of Europe than today's Europe. It's wrong to say that people do not like Europe. People love Europe. That's wrong to say. They don't like the way Europe is working today. That's all. That's their problem. And we saw that once again yesterday. And I'm now going to speak Dutch.
Le néerlandais.
The language of Vondel. President of the Commission, we met on the most recent occasion yesterday. Some of the reactions we heard, 1.11% of the European gross national income. That's far too much. Europe is getting smaller. Well, the Brits are leaving. That wasn't our decision. So it should be a smaller budget. But I'm saying frankly here to you and to everybody else, the truth is the opposite, actually. I can give you a few reasons why. In order to deal with the crisis that we're seeing now, whether it be the migration crisis, geopolitical crisis, financial crisis, which may come back to haunt us tomorrow, we need more Europe, not less Europe, in order to deal with these crises. We have a European border force that we need. We need a European defence. We need a European budget for the Eurozone. And the actions of Europe is not going to cost more. We're actually saving money because a lot of the expenditure that's not necessary is being spent at national level because the national member states are doing 28 times the same thing over and over again, where Europe can provide an added value. There's so many examples where this is true. Military expenditure, Mr. Van der Boot, I can tell you, 23% of the American expenditure is what we spend. I mean, we can't do what the Americans do. Why? Because we're doing it on 28 different occasions. And what about external border control? President of the Commission, we put forward, we heard a proposal, 34 billion euros to be spent on managing our external borders over 7 years. The Americans spend $34 million to do the same for 1 year. All our national leaders of government, when they come here to this parliament, they say that the management of our external borders should not be a priority of the European Union where new money should be spent. And I'd like to see them say that to their own citizens. Europe is not the enemy of the people. Europe is the best security that the citizens can have. And I ask you, Prime Minister, make sure that that's never forgotten. Because even the Franco-German motor will not be able to work in the long term if there's no lubrication, if there's no oil. The Belgian spirit of compromise that you master so well.
S'il vous plaît, je vous demande de respecter.
I'd like to ask you to keep within your speaking time, otherwise others would like to join in. I'm flexible with group leaders, but I think you spoke 8 minutes, Guy. Mr. Lambert on behalf of the Greens EFA.
Thank you, President. It's always a bit odd. Whenever it's my turn to speak, you always say that people need to respect their speaking time. Sure, I'm not the worst offender. Prime Minister, in our country, plumping for European cooperation is obvious. But Belgium doesn't weigh heavy against Trump or Putin. We don't have the size to do that. So we need to work together with our European neighbours. And that's obvious, I think, and has always been the case. For decades, Belgium has always been at the vanguard in certain areas. In the current context, we expect Belgium to redouble their efforts. But, Prime Minister, despite the words we've heard here today, your action shows that Belgium, which far too often is happy to just watch and stay idle rather than pushing for more integration. In Dutch, we can do things differently. We're dreaming of a Belgium who will be at the vanguard of the European fight against tax and social dumping. A Belgium that works together with European partners, making sure that there's maximal transparency for multinationals. A Belgium that joins the coalition of the willing with France and Germany to push for harmonization at European level for corporate tax. But unfortunately, your government 2 months ago had its fingers wrapped by the Commission because it's stimulating aggressive tax planning. Together with 2 neighbouring countries, the Benelux countries are undermining the European attempts to push for more tax justice. And at the same time, your Minister of Finance is quietly organising the funeral of the financial transaction tax. In French, we want to see a Belgium that can combine responsible taxation and reduction of inequalities. Belgium that is able to provide high-level public services while transforming our tax system so it's more fair and that everybody should pay according to their ability. But no, Belgium remains a tax haven for the ultra-rich who are fleeing their countries and for the multinational companies. Although the workers in this country are amongst the most taxed in Europe and in the world, your government, nevertheless, is refusing to claw back 942 million euros that were paid out free of charge. At the same time, the quality and accessibility to public services are getting worse. Social security and justice, which are essential pillars of our society, are becoming the variable adjustments of your strategy. In Dutch, we're dreaming of a Belgium as in the vanguard of ecological transition, because that's where the key for our future prosperity lies, and for that of future generations. Sustainable solutions need to be found and applied rather than sitting waiting for the rest of the world to do that. Working on energy independence for Europe, so that we don't have to support gas from Russia or oil from Saudi Arabia. Those are the challenges that European citizens can be inspired by. But unfortunately, Belgium has lost all credibility by not having a climate plan when it went to the Paris Climate Conference. You brought together all sorts of accusations from the European Commission for not having had enough ambition, for leaving alone climate issues, air quality issues, and growing traffic jams. At the same time, we're looking at our neighbours who are upset with age-old nuclear power stations being kept going. In French, we dream of a Belgium that can meet the challenge of asylum and migration, that can stop this silly Dublin system that's not working. We expect solidarity being shown by Belgium. We want to see a Belgium that welcomes and integrates those people in need who are knocking on our door. But no, you prefer to collaborate with the Sudanese dictator and send people who are fleeing hell back there. Nothing surprising, really, because some of your allies want to call into question the Geneva Convention, which is a central pillar of the right to asylum. You'd rather spend more to lock people up, to send people back and deport people because they don't have the right documents, because they weren't born in the right place. You say that your policy is firm and humane. Rather than firm, I would say violent. Rather than humane, I would say undignified. Humanity doesn't come from your government. It comes from our citizens who have assumed their responsibilities for welcoming into their homes those who are fleeing war and misery. They are bringing honour to our country where your government is bringing shame. Prime Minister, this Belgium that we, the ecologists, are looking for, that are dreaming of, it is possible. But in this country, everybody knows that it's not the Greens who hold power. It's not even you, Prime Minister, because you have taken the choice to throw in your lot and that of our country with a nationalist party who everybody knows that it and it alone decides where we're going. With a very Eurosceptic MVA, you are supporting every man for himself, or worse, everybody against everybody else. Facing the challenges of this century, Prime Minister, we will defend, on the contrary, audacity and solidarity. The contrast, I don't think, could be any greater, and the alternative couldn't be clearer. Thank you.
A nome del gruppo confederale.
On behalf of the GUE NGL group, Mrs. Zimmer has the floor. Prime Minister, I too would like to thank you very much indeed on behalf of my group for this debate, a debate about the future of the European Union. And that's how it has panned out so far. I would like to make a clear point that Brussels and Belgium has been the gateway to Europe for me. I'm one of the few people in the front row, speaking in the front in the first round, who is from the east of Europe and understands that everything hasn't changed with taking down the borders. We have to understand that for historical and cultural reasons we belong together, and the EU and Europe cannot live without that diversity, which is why we have to continue to stand for this. It's interesting for me, and this is the hallmark of the debate for me, that it's not something we've been very successful at transcending, these expectations of the EU that we have, that are all very diverse. It's not the first time that this has happened. I simply note the fact that many Belgian members are keen to debate with you. Strictly from the European perspective, that's fine. However, there are others who do not contribute that much today. My group is suffering from the fact we have no Belgian members, and I promise you that will change at the next elections. And if you come to the European Parliament after the next elections, if you're still Prime Minister then, I guarantee that there'll be at least one Belgian member speaking from the left of the chamber. I'm very happy that people come to the European Union with great expectations. They continue to have those great expectations and wish to take them forward, but they're unhappy. They're unhappy with the current state of development of the Union and what we are seeing on a daily basis. We cannot ignore this fact, and I would have liked to have seen you go into these contradictions even more. It cannot be that in the European Union we have regions in which the term social devastation has to be used. Social devastation. We've got a Bulgarian presidency now. I don't know it outside official encounters with the representatives of Bulgaria or at events involving their representation. If you've been to Bulgaria, Bulgaria is not alone, but there is a deep divide between the level of expectations of the EU and the daily life people are leading in the EU, and this divide is growing ever greater, and we have to deal with that. And in my mind, it's not enough if you, Prime Minister, say that we've done a great deal, we've emerged from the deepest crisis and we're moving forwards and we want to spend more on this and invest more in that. That's not enough for me. I would like a very clear promise. I'd like to hear that from all heads of state and government who come here about what they will do to ensure that we put that situation behind us. I think that would create more value for everyone. You're quite right to say what you say, that freedom and justice must exist, and that cannot exist without the individual freedom of every person. The rights of freedom in politics belong together with social fundamental rights. The right to have rights, These things cannot be separated. They must be put together. That is what I speak for. And I would like every head of state and government to give us an answer on what they are doing to implement this. I've learnt from Mr. Juncker that heads of state and government can be welcomed subtly in council. You can pat them on the back and say, he's my favourite dictator. However, that's just one side of things. That doesn't resolve the problem, and I would expect you to do that, and I would very much like to hear from you. What are you doing in council, for example, to ensure, on the one hand, Orban and others are encouraged to carry this shared responsibility you've talked about, to show responsibility for the refugee crisis, the rule of law, independence of courts and of the media? And what are they doing, on the other hand, to develop tangible ideas for putting the current situation behind us? If the treaties are a limitation on us from common responsibility for social justice and so on. Now, I hear you say you can't reopen the treaties. That would be a contradiction right now. But then how do we do it? My view, and the view of many of my group colleagues, are that we've gone from treaty to treaty, and in fact that each successive treaty has limited the options for the EU in drawing up policies. But we need to make this possible, that solidarity and social justice can be brought forward. We cannot have regions suffering social devastation in the EU, and without fundamental social rights, people will not commit. They will not defend their right to freedom. They may be indifferent to what the government is doing in their country. And what we're doing is allowing a certain number of people to be alienated from the EU because they don't find their freedom of movement allowed, and we need to deal with that. My last word is, look to the people from Eastern Europe living homeless in Berlin, Paris and London, and to whom we as a union have refused help so far. On behalf of the EFDD Group, Mr. Farage.
Thank you. It is quite extraordinary that we can have in this room the head honchos of Brussels, Mr. Juncker, the Belgian Prime Minister, the leaders of the big groups, to discuss the future of the European project, and there's barely been a mention of the biggest, most dramatic event that has ever happened since the foundation of the European Treaties 60 years ago, namely Brexit. You don't want to talk about Brexit. And I wonder whether it had actually ever occurred to you, Mr. Juncker, that when David Cameron came here to negotiate with you, had you given him just a few modest concessions, had you given him the ability to control our borders a little bit more, Brexit wouldn't have happened. But no, we don't discuss that. No, what we do is we say to ourselves that our citizens want more Europe. I've heard it again and again this morning. We have a problem with unemployment amongst the youth of the Mediterranean. I know the answer: more Europe. We have a problem with growing terrorism in our countries, something that we've caused ourselves, but we decide no, the answer is, or in the case of the Belgian Prime Minister Michel, to have a European CIA. We decide that on taxation, on regulation, no member state can make their own decisions. It's all got to be decided here in Brussels because we need more Europe. In fact, many of you have decided that migrant quotas are a good idea, so that individual member states can't make their own decisions. So is it any wonder that there are countries now, voters everywhere, waking up to the idea that you cannot be an independent, democratic nation state and a member of this union? You know, Brexit, I think, is going to prove to be just the first brick that is knocked out of the wall. Just look at the results in Italy a few weeks ago. Look at the stunning results in Hungary the other week, that magnificent victory of Viktor Orban, and about 70% of voters in Hungary voting for parties that want the nation state to be the key to everything. And you know, if you really think about whether this European project can survive or not, it all comes down to what is a nation? What is the unit towards which we give our allegiance, to which we pay our taxes, to which we would, in extremis, be prepared to defend? And there are some, like Mr Verhofstadt here, who seem to think that this flag represents a European identity, and he clearly identifies as a European. Many of you in this room identify as Europeans, but you're missing something. The peoples of Europe do not identify with that flag. They do not identify with these institutions. There is no, oh, well, if you're on the payroll, it's easy to say it works, isn't it? But actually, out there in the real world, there is not a European demos, there is not a European identity. Maybe, but maybe, there may be one exception. There may be one exception, and that could be Belgium. Because nobody ever dares tell the truth about Belgium. Belgium is not a nation. It's an artificial creation. I know the Brits did it. Maybe once again we can be blamed. But the truth is there are two parts of Belgium. They speak different languages. They dislike each other intensely. There's no national TV station. There's no national newspaper. Belgium is not a nation, and maybe that's why you're happy to sign up to a higher European level. Well, if Belgium wants it, that's fine, but I can assure you, and you can scream and shout all you like, just look at the election result. You're losing, folks. You're losing. Brexit is the first brick out of the wall. You've learnt none of the lessons. The days of this project are over. We want to live in nation states, not false artificial creations. Thank you, everybody. Have a lovely time. Oh, enjoy the European elections next year. They're going to be great fun.
Onorevole Farage, le ricordo che anche lei...
Mr Farage, you are drawing a salary as a member of the European Parliament like everyone else. It's not as if the others are paid and you are not. I don't think you've foregone your payments, and the same applies to your group.
President, I supported Britain leaving the European Union. Therefore, my job ending, I am the turkey that voted for Christmas.
Come lei ha affermato che
as you have stated, that those supporting Europe are doing so because they're on the payroll, I'm making the point that you are too. On behalf of the ENF, Mr Annemans.
Thank you, President. I have to say that for 30 years I myself served in the Belgian Parliament, but I've never been called on to speak against the Speaker, but maybe on what Mr Farage has said, I haven't got a great deal to add. I can't see the Prime Minister very well, but I hope he can hear me. Maybe I can just level some protests. We have interpretation in this House, but we heard today many people don't speak their mother tongue, so you don't seem to have that excuse. The fact that you only address this House in French, I think, is a political choice, and my colleagues in Vlaams Belang in the Flemish Parliament and the Belgian Parliament, I'd like to ask them whether they allowed the Belgian state to present itself as a solely French-speaking state. That's my first point. Secondly, as an ENF representative, I'm not at all surprised. Not at all surprised. Belgium is always the best kid in the class. It always raises their hand, never kicks up a fuss, lets everything go ahead. It doesn't surprise me that Mr Juncker has congratulated you. Your government, I don't think, is any different to the Belgian governments in the past. As Mr Verhofstadt's always said, they've always been pro-European. Your government is no different. Belgium and the European Union, it's a love affair. The European Union believes that Belgium, well, the European Union thinks that Belgium is the European Union laid small, and Belgium believes that the European Union is a bigger version of itself. But there's a question of the money going back and forward, of course. So the love affair has a reason behind it. And we've heard in the debate today one thing that's been made clear, and that is that the sickness of this European Union, and here in this cathedral of the European Union we can see that at home, when you talk to the electorate, you say something different to what you say here. And we've seen this illustrated here by Mr. Lohnes, a representative of the biggest coalition partner of your coalition, Mr. Michel, who at home gives a different story to here. But we don't see the result of what he tells at home on TV, on the radio, where the MVA is going to act as if it's scandalous that there's more money going to the European Union next week, that there's a new tax system at the European Union that is looming. But here, in this cathedral, when he comes here, when he's talking to his Prime Minister, we don't hear anything about that. Neither about migration, where the Secretary of State for Migration at home, in the studios, in the radio studios as well, has one message. And then Charles Michel makes an entrance, and suddenly Belgium is all in the Belgian garden is rosy, and indeed in the European Union. But that's not true. Mr. Farage is correct. The populations are revolting against this idea. You cannot lie at home when you come here and tell a different story. You can't tell one story at home and lie here. And I think you can't hide behind the Federation in doing that. So all the criticism against MVA, all the criticism you're going to hear, Prime Minister, in the media in Belgium in the coming weeks, that really is a drop in the ocean. It's grist to the mill of the Flemish electorate, and the NVA we've seen here today, the way they act. Mr. Lohnes has given you a standing ovation and singing the European and federal hymn. That is the big difference between reality and what they like to portray themselves as doing. And that's the core of the problem with the European Union, that all of those who are singing the federal song here are two-faced when they go home, and that is not what the electorate wants to see.
Mesdames et Messieurs,
Ladies and gentlemen, everyone is free to say what they wish in this debate, but let me remind you that the debate is about the future of Europe and not the future of Belgium. Mr. Epidideios, a non-attached member.
Grazie, Presidente. Καλώς ήρθατε, κύριε Πρωθυπουργέ.
Thank you and welcome, Prime Minister. Those who believe in the idea of a unified Europe, who seek to respond to the needs of peoples and nations, are worried about the path that the European Union is followed. They're worried about its future. They're asking themselves, what future can it have when it moves away from its founding principles? What future can it have when it denies its cultural and religious origins? When it leaves solidarity behind? Look at Greece, for example, the terrible, miserable situation that European Union citizens find themselves in. And what does the European Union do? It turns against them. It imposes unfair taxes, increases their contributions, confiscates their property. When we take the wrong path, when we refuse to listen to young people in unemployment, when we turn away from people in insecure jobs with low wages, when we accept millions of clandestine immigrants arriving in Greece, what future can we have? We say that we promote democracy, but we want Turkey to join, a country that is anti-democratic, that doesn't recognize Cyprus, and which has just imprisoned two Greek soldiers, against all the rules. So do you really think that the European Union has the determination, has indeed the strength to correct all of the mistakes that I've mentioned?
Without further ado, I'll give the floor to Prime Minister Charles Michel, who will answer questions, speaking for about 10 minutes.
Bien, Monsieur le Président, chers collègues, je voudrais d'abord vous remercier.
President, colleagues, first of all, I'd like to thank you for your interventions in the debate. I'll try and react to some of the points. Mr. Weber, first of all, you praised the regional dimension, and I said that in my message. I think there is no sense in opposing different democracies, local, national and regional. And in my country, Belgium, we have a tradition of doing that to forge our positions at a European level, and we have regular ongoing consultations on the various issues. The message I give you from Belgium is one that takes into account the different local and regional political sensitivities about the future of the European Union. That's the first point. The second point, as was said, compliments were given and criticism likewise. I am accustomed to that, speaking regularly in the Belgian Parliament, and would expect no other. We are committed, I personally am committed, at a European level, not for a romantic, blithe version of Europe disconnected from reality, but one that is really founded on achieving results on the key issues.
So, colleagues, we are convinced that Europe has to provide added value, prosperity for our citizens, more purchasing power. We're convinced when it comes to security, we need to work together more. Mr. Verhofstadt is right. When it comes to defence, in recent months, we have said that we need to push on there, and we're going in the right direction, and Belgium is committed there. And we have an important role to play. And migration, yes, it's a difficult challenge. We have to have a nuanced response to that. And to Mr. Lambert in French, I'd like to say that I expected from you that you would be outraged. You didn't manage to get elected to the Belgian Parliament, but you managed to get het up. You did that here. I don't think I need to take lessons from a political party in Belgium that has brought about a bubble in photovoltaic industries by sending massive bills to Flemish citizens. I'm happy to assume the difficult decisions that we take, as with other countries, on migration. We assume that responsibility.